I woke up one day and decided I wanted to create some levels and art to add to my portfolio, but there's one main issue. I am not a texture artist or a 3D modeler. I really wanted to make something for one of my favorite games, Custom Robo Battle Revolution, so I decided to recreate one of the maps. I started by grabbing some references from the level itself. Next, I created a new Unity project with URP and imported ProBuilder so I can begin blocking out the level. I deleted the props from the default scene and left the lighting and post-processing volume for the time being. Once again, I'm not a 3D modeler, so I'm having to guess the size and dimensions of each model. Luckily, there is already a grid in the default game that shows the size of the level. With this, I can take one grid and convert it to one block or 1 meter using ProBuilder. From observing the map, I was able to roughly count the grid size to be 14 by 14 with a little bit of overlapping from the terrain. With the in-game grid, it comes out to be 20 by 20. I was having some issues using ProBuilder from the start since the default material was going to URP's default lit material, so I decided to follow this quick tutorial to make everything look the way it should be. With that being done, I was finally able to start creating the blockout stage of this level. Because I already had some references to work with, I was able to create the base of the stage without much issue. As I was creating the blockout, I noticed the scaling was a little bit off from the original, so I went back and made necessary adjustments as needed to the scene. After finishing the basic blockout of the stage, I decided to download a tree stump 3D model. After importing it and seeing it in the scene, I felt very lazy and unsatisfied, so I did what anyone with ADHD would do, create their own no matter how bad it would turn out. I started by creating a model similar to the one in Custom Robo. Once I finished the block out of the first object, I downloaded a free texture from textures.com to see how it would look like on the model. I created the material for the model and well, kinda sucked, so I'm still not sure if I wanted a detailed version of the model or something more along the line with the same graphics as the original game. So I decided to play around with the textures to see how I like it. I started to become a bit more satisfied with it after playing with the settings, but I think I can do better by adding some texture to the top of the stump. This was looking slightly better, but I feel I could get more out of it by adding more details to the model itself. And it turns out, ProBuilder does not want to do the things I want it to do, such as change the color of the default material. So I did what any illogical and inexperienced person would do, and that was create a new material and applied it to the material of the newly created edge. And now, spending more time than I'd like to admit modeling and texturing this beautiful hunk of stump, I feel it meets my needs for the time being. Now I just have to repeat the process for the other objects. And once again, during the middle of texturing another model, ProBuilder is giving me the same issue as once before. Once I finished making most of the models, I made my way to the stairs. The stairs are probably the most unique model as it's made with multiple pillars. I finished creating the base of the models and adding textures. Now I will be working on the terrain part of the level. In the original map, we can see that there are at least two different parts of the terrain. The organic part with grass and rock textures, and another part with a metallic hexagon grid. First, I'll start with the terrain itself and modifying it to fit the level. Then I'll make my way to the grid selection. Now at this point in crafting of the terrain, I wasn't too worried about getting the exact hills and bumps to match the original. As long as it had that hill-like cliff feel to it, it was good. While using references to the original, I began adding the rough part of the hills. Creating the waterfall might be the hardest thing to do here since I've never created something like that before. Luckily, I was able to find a clean and thorough tutorial. After I was mostly satisfied with my primitive waterfall made out of particles, I decided to work on a shader for the water itself. Just like what I wanted to do with the original water, I wanted to make mine move like it was the current. I found a very in-depth tutorial for a very nice water shader created by Binary Lunar. I followed this tutorial and learned what I could to help create a water shader. Almost finished, I created the grid that is placed under the map. My second step for the terrain is now to make the metallic surface. After fighting to make a hexagon grid pattern through Photoshop, I was finally able to finish making the metallic part of the terrain. As much as like the grass and dirt textures I use for the terrain, I'm now going to swap out those and every other texture with a more stylized texture that I will modify using Photoshop. And now with the good help from my friend post-processing, I can finally make the scene have a very grungy PlayStation feel to it, or make it a very vibrant color like GameCube. But having an utter detest for how the low graphics turned out, I decided to crank the textures back up to the original 1K resolution, and I went even as far as to create height maps and normal maps for the textures that didn't have any. I wanted to create the models I made with ProBuilder with even more detail using Blender, but for some reason whenever I launched Blender, it crashes before even loading the program. So now I'm stuck with using ProBuilder and trying to add more details onto certain models. The main ones I wanted to focus on was the stepping pillars, the tree stumps, and the rocks in the water. The logs themselves were mostly fine because, well, they're just Lincoln logs, and the same thing with the planks with the bridge because they're just planks. Here are some before and after shots of the reworked models. I would like to thank everyone who stayed this long for my video. I know it's not much, but I mostly enjoyed working with a small project. All the links that I used for every website and everything I downloaded will be left in the video description, and I will try to upload the entire project so anybody can download it and see what's inside of it.